Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined Doctor Who as he journeys into time and arrives at episode 579. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn. How's everybody doing this week?
There's a great story circulating where Elmo jumped onto Twitter and said, just checking in, how's everybody doing? And the internet, being the internet, unloaded with tales of existential horror and how rough things are, and how one person, I know I'll never be able to buy a house in this economy, and I've come to accept that. Somebody else talked about some issues they were having. Somebody else had just gotten fired. It was just on and 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 on. And to which Elmo replied, I'm glad I asked. It's important to check up on your friends. It's kind of like that. If I had seen Elmo's post, I would have chimed in. But other than that, I'm okay.
Did you guys watch anything or read anything this past week?
I finished a book, The Southern Book Club's Guide to Vampire Slaying, which is the same author who wrote How to Sell a Haunted House.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Grady Hendrix is his name. It was good. It wasn't quite as good as How to Sell a Haunted House, but it was very enjoyable. It had a bit more... It's kind of Fright Night, but the protagonist is a middle-aged housewife in a book club in the South. So it's kind of like has that vibe. A vampire comes into town and they try to have to fight him off. Essentially, that's the gist of it. But it goes some very different directions. It's not your traditional vampire. It's not your traditional story. And it has a couple very graphic, very mature sections to it. So if you're squeamish about that sort of thing, I wouldn't recommend it. But if that sort of thing doesn't bother you and you enjoy kind of a B horror book, you would enjoy this book. It's got some pretty good humor in it too.
It sounds kind of interesting.
Other than that, I've been playing Marvel's Spider-Man.
How's that?
Which is phenomenal. It is amazing. It's spectacular. It's all the Spider-Man.
It's all the Spider-Man adjectives.
I've been playing
friendly and neighborhood.
Yes, it is. You can actually greet people on the streets.
Oh, cool.
You just walk up to them and go, hey, and in fact, there's a trophy for it by greeting so many people. It's so much fun. There's all sorts of different little side missions you get to do. I've played it for about 14 hours now. And I think at last check, I was only at like 40% of the way through the game. So it's very big, lots to do, but it rolls it out slowly so you're not overwhelmed all at once. And the level of detail as you're swinging through New York City is incredible. You have to go, or you can go at some point and take pictures of landmarks throughout New York. And so some of the landmarks are Avengers Tower and Alias Investigations and the Sanctum Sanctorum, along with actual real New York landmarks. So it's the level of detail is incredible. And the gameplay is a lot of fun too. It's kind of, imagine Arkham Asylum, but it's Spider-Man set in New York City. I mean, that's kind of what it's like, because you have some stealth stuff, you have some just fighting stuff, but they use the abilities of Spider-Man wisely. And the traversing through the city is a lot of fun as well. What about you, Glenn?
Well,
or Sean?
Yeah, Sean, go first.
We caught up on an Oscar nominee. We watched Past Lives, which was excellent. Really, really good. And watched the Chiefs win. Go team. Did I tell you I finished the third Dresden book? I think I did, maybe.
You were almost done.
Yeah,
I was almost done. I did finish it and have started the fourth. And that's about it, I think.
Well, you reminded
Which I
me.
kept us pretty busy this week.
You reminded me of something else I did. I watched Chiefs too. So.
As did I.
I actually watched Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which is pretty. It's a pretty good superhero movie. It's kind of. I mean, it's not the best superhero movie, but it's fun.
It's fun.
It's got a lot of heart, a lot of emphasis on family. I think what DC kind of felt like it did, and I think that James Gunn will probably right the ship a bit, but they went from being super uber too dark with their universe to almost on the verge of being too light with it. And I kind of felt that with Flash and this. And don't get me wrong,
And the first Aquaman too.
I don't think that the first Aquaman. I think the first Wonder Woman movie and the first Aquaman movie to me was the right balance of light, fun, superhero film. This one and the Flash and probably even the second Wonder Woman movie just kind of felt like they went a little too light with them. But now, don't get me wrong, I would much rather see light, fun superhero movies as opposed to that Zack Snyder stuff. But but overall, I liked it. It's not bad, and it's unfortunate that this is where the original DCEU bows out because I think we've finally untidily gotten invested in some of these heroes and some of the good ones like Jason Momoa's Aquaman, which I've really enjoyed. Gal Gadot's Wonder Woman, great. Mm-hmm. And even I'll say it. The guy who plays Bruce, thank you, Ben Affleck's for Bruce Wayne has been great. Probably the highlight of the Snyder stuff.
I listened to the Smartless episode with him, and he said he finally figured out how to play the character Flash.
Oh,
at least that's how he felt.
And then I finished the first season of Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, and I can't say much because you guys are not done. But the last episode both was epic and blew me away, and then made me mad because it's obvious that they're setting up the next season, and where it went, I didn't want it to go, but it couldn't have gone anywhere else. So it's going to be very cool how they set up the next season. So, or how they deal with the next season. I think it's going to be kind of cool.
Hello, fellow time travelers, and welcome to the Doctor Who Target Book Club podcast, the only podcast to discuss, in story order, all the Doctor Who novelizations. My name is Tony Whitt, and every 2 weeks or so, I'm joined by a 2 to 3 person discussion panel, including our so-called expert who's been a Who fan since 1979. That would be me. We also get the views of intermediate, casual, and novice fans who either have never seen the show or who have never read these books until these podcasts, including
Dalton Hughes
and
Alison Fitz-Seyfried.
You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you find good podcasts, or even ones like ours. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point podcast.
We are going on a journey, a very long journey, through the world of the Target novelizations in publication order. Every week we are looking at a new book, talking about Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Hulke, and all our Doctor Who novelization friends. Whatever you do, keep turning the pages. This is Jason Miller of the Doctor Who Literature Podcast, a member of the Direction Point Podcast Network, and you are listening to Traveling the Vortex, a Direction Point podcast.
I listened to Fugitive the Daleks, which is the First Doctor Adventures most recent release, and that is my something new 2-minute review. This is Stephen Noonan's outing as the First Doctor in this one. He does a good job as the First Doctor. I still think his tone isn't quite there, but his cadence and his rhythm with the voice and the mannerisms that he does are spot on. So it's one of those, just like Tim Treloar for me, when I start listening to him as the Doctor, I have to settle into it. And once I settle into him portraying the First Doctor, then I'm invested, and he is the first Doctor for me. It just takes a little bit to get into it. This one also stars Vicky and, surprisingly, Dodo, which I thought was an interesting addition. Vicky is Maureen O'Brien returns. She's a much stronger character than she ever was as a companion than she ever was in any of the series. And she was a good companion, don't get me wrong, in the series, but she's really strong in this. And I think she really carries a lot of it. The Doctor ends up showing up in, I guess, ancient Troy, not long after, it's not long after. For him, it's not long after he left her, but very much for her because she's grown old and has a grandson now. And TARDIS materializes, and she doesn't know why he could possibly be there. And so the adventure ensues. There is an element to the story that I kind of caught on to early. I don't know that that was to its detriment. And I think part of the reason why I figured out a surprise that was revealed about halfway through is because it's something that I previously thought would be cool to do in a Doctor Who story. So I think my mind was already there, and that's why I kind of figured it out. And then Dodo Chapelet is played by Lauren Cornelius, who does a good job as the character. Unfortunately, I think the character is very underused in this. She shows up kind of
like she was in the show.
Well, yeah, she shows up kind of late. I think the character has more potential to kind of expand and explore that element later on in more releases as they go. So I'm looking forward to them doing that. But in this one, it really kind of felt like she was underused. But I really felt like that Lauren Cornelius did a good job as Dodo. I believed that it was her, and I think she does honor to the character that Jackie Lane did. With also kind of giving it, like I say, being able to expand the characters. So I highly recommend it. It was a lot of fun, and that is my Something New 2-minute review.
Nice. Was a surprise involving Daleks?
Well, since they were in the title, no.
The title.
No, I think...
Wait, there were Daleks in this story?
Just without giving anything too much away, the Fugitive was the surprise.
This is Tim Trelaw.
This is David J. Howe.
I'm Peter Purvis.
I am Sadie Miller.
This is Lauren Cornelius.
Larry, it's Fraser.
For all things in the Doctor Who collecting world and beyond, the Doctor Who Collectors Podcast. I'm Larry Van Mersbergen, your host, and I've been collecting for 42 years. You're listening to Traveling the Vortex on the Direction Point Podcast Network.
Hi, I'm Rupert Booth.
I am known as Paul Ferry.
And my name is Barry Williams.
Together, we host Time Ram.
Time Ram's a cruel mistress.
It's a random number generator.
That also.
We roll a number from 1 to 13, and that's our Doctor. Then 1 to 300 for the story, and then we ram them together.
Even if it doesn't make sense.
Cruel, I tell you.
Time Ram, putting the wrong Doctors in the wrong stories, so you don't have to.
You're listening to Traveling the Vortex.
You are invited on an adventure across all of time and space, in a completely random order. It's the Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. Jump in the TARDIS with your hosts,
Eric Gulbranson,
Asad Kheshki,
and
Matthew Kressel.
Explore Doctor Who TV stories, audio adventures, and books, both novels and non-fiction. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast. It's the entire Whoniverse on shuffle. The Police Box in the Junkyard podcast is a member of the Direction Point network and is available about once a month wherever you find your podcasts. You are listening to Traveling the Vortex.
Well, we don't have any news this week, really, to talk about. So I'd say let's just get right on with the topic of a discussion, which is Doctor Who Journey into Time. And I lost my document that sets this up. Sorry, guys.
I'll say the synopsis I have is not very good.
Yeah. Well,
it's basically what if.
Right. So Journey in the Time actually is an unreleased audio because this was done as a pilot by a company that took a long time getting the okay to do it on radio from the BBC. And what happened was they decided they wanted to adapt it for radio, but the BBC did not want it to be played in the UK or surrounding areas, and they wanted to make sure that offshore pirate radio stations didn't get it as well. And so there had to be a lot of assurances that it was going to be sold to markets, overseas. There was also some concerns from the BBC that some of the things that are sold to the US market in those days, in the 1960s, was marketed as BBC even when they weren't. And so sometimes, according to the BBC, their quality wasn't up to BBC standard, but people in the US were being led to believe they were BBC stories. And so there was some hesitation with that, but eventually they did get it going, and they had to do a pilot for this in order to, as a proof of concept, and then eventually things started to fall apart. But it would have been a 52 installment radio series of about, I think it's 20 minutes each, 25 minutes each. And so the pilot was actually recorded by Peter Cushing, who played the Doctor in the movies adaptations of Doctor Who and the Daleks, and Doctor Who Daleks Invade. No, I'm sorry, it's just Daleks Invasion Earth 2150. I always forget AD. Such a long title.
The 80.
Yeah, don't forget the 80. And so that's where we land on that. And what we did is we found a group called Beermat Productions, and I will have a link on our website and in the show notes for this episode so that you can go check it out, because they have done some other productions as well, but they actually, the script has been reprinted in Nothing at the End of the Lane, issue 3. They were able to get it, and there's a really nice write-up on Journey into Time and how it kind of came about. And so these guys took the script that is available, and they made their own audio, and that's what we're going to be reviewing right now.
That article in Nothing in the Lane was really interesting, I thought. The amount of detail they were able to get out of everything that happened in the article, and the even correspondence between people that they were able to publish. I was really impressed by the quality of journalism performed there.
I would agree.
The idea that
especially
Boris Karloff was going to be the Doctor.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
I agree. It was really well done, especially for, I think sometimes we downplay fanzines, but I think sometimes the professional quality of a lot of fanzines really comes through, and I think it really did agreed in this article as well. I also thought it was fascinating that this was one of those kind of, I think he said in the late 1980s or 90s, it was a blip, and they didn't, it was like some information they'd come across that nobody really knew about and didn't get, looked into it and didn't get much information on it back then. And then this guy was able to put together as much information as he did this many years later. I thought was very, very impressive.
I think it was a pretty comprehensive history of why this thing didn't happen.
Yeah.
There's investigative reporting, and then there's crawling around in the mud of the creek bed, kicking over rocks. And
that's
this is definitely the latter.
Yes.
Yeah. There were so many. I'm right there with you guys. There were so many little, oh, wow, really? I found myself kind of repeating that mantra throughout the read of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what do you guys think? Number one, I think this Beermat Productions, for an amateur group, does a really, really good job with what they've got. It does sound like maybe this was some of these parts were recorded remotely, but overall the quality of the production is really good. It's right down to the fact that they've got some really good music as well.
Yeah, agreed. I think it surprised me. Kind of in some ways the same way that Mission to the Unknown surprised me with the level of quality that went into the fan production. I wasn't really, I didn't know what I was getting into this week. So it was a pleasant surprise all the way around to be like, this is actually kind of a cool story for being essentially a alternate version of Unearthly Child, and yet not. And then it's a fan produced audio, and yet not, because it sounds too good to be a fan-produced audio.
Right.
Just kind of across the board. I was very pleased with it.
Certainly,
Sean, did you read the article before you listened to it?
No, I did the other way. I listened and then went back.
Okay. Yeah, so did I. I wasn't as impressed by the story itself. I was kind of hearing the title, Journey into Time, not doing any research into what it was, and just diving into the story. I was a little disappointed that it was just kind of a retelling and reimagining of An Unearthly Child. And the story itself, not quite scripted as well, I think, as the TV series had. It's an interesting idea and a cool concept of, okay, well, let's change kind of the Doctor's personality and make it like the movie, and what would that pilot be like? But it was, overall, I was kind of like, the story left me disappointing. The back history of everything makes the entire situation more interesting to me.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of land in the. You said make it more like the movie, but I don't even think they went that far. It's certainly not the Doctor that we're familiar with from the TV series, but I think that was a choice. That was we're kind of making our own thing by borrowing from something that already exists, and I don't think it even goes as far as to liken itself to. Although I think his temperament and mood is maybe closer to Hartnell, the characterization of the Doctor is probably closer to the Cushing Doctor, and Cushing probably would have played it very similar to how he did. And obviously it's another actor playing it in this, but would have played it much more as he did. But I really kind of feel like the characterization isn't even really the Doctor from Doctor Who from the movie versions either. Which it shouldn't be, because Malcolm Hulke actually wrote the script for this, so it wasn't like Terry Nation or David Whitaker writing for the films. But I kind of like the idea of, and from our perspective, it's kind of an Elseworlds thing, because we know the story. We're very familiar with An Unearthly Child, and I was really kind of surprised by some of the liberties they took. We never introduce the teachers. What we do get of teachers is very minimal, and the roles are reversed. We have the male teacher, I'm not sure if they said his name, is the history teacher, and the female teacher, I got the impression she was a science teacher. So I thought that was an interesting switch up. But then what made it even more interesting is we don't even bring the teachers into it all. We bring Mike and his dad into it and bring them on board. And it really makes me wonder how much they would have diverted from, how much they just borrowed from the first story and how much they might have diverted from the series if they had gone on with it. Because this first adventure, they end up at the American Revolution, don't they? Is where this ends.
At the end of it.
And so that's where they would have gone on from there. And so I would have been really fascinated to know. And so I think I understand what you mean about the story not being very good, because I think it's a bit meddling. I think it kind of takes its time to get where it needs to be. But I think the story and the idea was very fascinating.
And I said that it was kind of similar to the movie, I guess, in the fact that he's human more than anything else.
Doctor Who. And the original.
Sitting and thinking about it, in the movies, he's from the current time, where in this, he's from the future, which I thought was a nice, interesting change to kind of almost make him like the TV version, but not quite, since that, at the time, we didn't know he was truly an alien.
Well, that's just
at the time they were writing this.
At the time that this had been written, that was the idea, was that he and Susan were from the future, so Earth's future.
I think that's for me, that was one of the most interesting things about it, is that, it opens and it seems like it is just an alternate telling of Unearthly Child. Okay. And Keith, you're right. The story's kind of middling as it goes. But what makes it work for me is, and because I didn't read the article first, it's not until late when we get inside the TARDIS and, they've made these allusions to, we're from the year 3100 or whatever, but it's really not until they get Mike inside the TARDIS at the end and Doctor Who says, I built this myself, that it suddenly snapped from being Unearthly Child to, this is more like the movie version Doctor. Okay. So then kind of my perception filter kicked in and changed everything around to put it in that universe versus the Unearthly Child universe. And then to read the article and kind of see all the other changes that were actually kind of present in this thing and kind of painted in the rest of the numbers, was like, okay. But we've talked before about Unearthly Child and how essentially perfect it is in the first episode. That there's so much information that is given to us. There's so much show setup that is given to us. And yet it's not dry exposition. It's interesting. There's a mystery. You're really not even sure who the main character is, because we start with Ian and Barbara talking about who is this strange kid. And then to, get all of Doctor Who in 20 some odd minutes. It's bigger on the inside. It travels through time, and we're gone. It's all there. But then for this one to come along and go, we wind up in the American Revolution. I'm sorry, that's a far better jump off point for episode 2
than
the Tribe of Gum.
Yeah, that's very true.
I'd have been just, okay, what's next? I mean, give me the next episode of this. I would have been, totally on board with that. And so I think in a weird way, this being a little middling to start kind of made me, even more than I already do, appreciate Unearthly Child. It just kind of continued to bump it up a notch, because yes, we stole some elements. We borrowed this, we borrowed that. And yet look how much that enhanced this while still making the original. It just goes to show that that's how you launch a TV show. You write it like that. But I did enjoy the changes, and really, once Mike was introduced as kind of the substitute Ian Barbara character, that's when it really kind of, for me, picked up, because it was like, okay, so now it feels like it actually has diverged. And so where are we going with it now? And what else is going to be different? And so the idea that we're going to have the Doctor and Susan and Mike traveling, and it's only a threesome team TARDIS instead of 4, and they're both young people. Well, this almost kind of sets it up to flow into the TV action comics.
Yeah, it's true.
It kind of is borrowing a little bit from that as well. And I don't know if Glenn would be more expert on what the time frame as far as when this was written versus when those were coming out. But
would have been right around the same time.
So I don't know. It just seemed like maybe that was going to be another potential tie-in or crossover for material to be borrowed from. But I dug it.
Could be. I think what this does, when you look at it, if you look at Doctor Who on television, Doctor Who that could have been for radio, Doctor Who in the comics, and Doctor Who in film, they're all really kind of variations on the same thing, but they all have enough different about them that they all stand out and become something different on their own. And don't even necessarily, I think when you say tie-in, you mean ideas borrowed. I don't think you mean it actually was tying in, because that's, John and Jillian, and they're not even, they're actual grandchildren, and it is quite different. But I think I see what you mean by it sort of not only borrows from what had come before with the television and the film, but it does sort of borrow similar themes from the comic, and that might have been an influence as well.
And I think
it's interesting that the Doctor is very, when Susan wants to go off and join school, he's very, you cannot, make sure you do not let anyone know where you're from, and then he's the one very loose-lipped about everything.
Yeah.
The flip on a dime bothered me. If there's a falling down, it's, Don't let anybody near. Oh, it must be. You must go on your way. You don't need to be here. Shoo, shoo, shoo. And then he gets inside. Well, let me show you around. You can order food. You can do this. You can. Really?
Yeah, we're from the future. I guess the cat was out of the bag at that point.
That's what I was going to say. I think the cat was out of the bag. The doctor was like, all right, can't beat him, join him.
And if you step over here to this machine, we'll wipe your memory.
And maybe that's part of the expectation of, the doctor being grumpy about it still once it happens in Unearthly Child, where at this he is almost jolly to show someone his inventions.
Yeah, right.
Well, and it kind of still fits in with that element of the doctor that, he loves to show off and explain things to people. And I imagine Susan's had her fill of it at this point. So in a way, it's like, oh, I can, I have somebody new. Okay. But I think for me, what's one of the interesting bits of it is I mentioned What If earlier, and the What If series for Marvel on Disney Plus. I kind of go both ways with it because in a way I kind of lament the fact that it is so tied to the MCU with its jump off points, because I feel like the comic fans are probably, screaming and railing. It's like, well, why don't you do so-and-so, or why can't we have this, or why can't we have that, versus always returning to the MCU. But I mean, it makes obviously financial sense that that's the most successful version of these characters with the widest amount of exposure at this point. That's who we're going to target to bring into this.
And it's still the MCU.
Yeah.
And it's still the MCU.
Well, that's just it though. I mean, it is it is homage to the comics though, because the comics were What If of the Marvel universe. So I mean, you
sure,
you deal with what you've got.
But you have a show called What If where you can sidestep into other universes, but they're not introducing anybody new. It's still,
but they did in season 2.
Well, I'm only 2 episodes into season 2 so far, but it's still characters and situations that you remember this moment. Well, what if it went this way? And so that's kind of where they go. And while we've listened to the Unbound series,
which is that?
Which is a completely different kind of deal from Doctor Who. Is it's, well, what if this Doctor was completely different?
Right.
So it's not even similar. It's just another variation. This to me feels more like a what if.
Yeah.
Because it almost feels like it could have been where Unearthly Child started, but then no, it actually went this direction because, not necessarily in a change from the show itself, but we're presenting a sidestep to that story.
Yeah.
And so I'm very curious. I would genuinely love to see more of this in audio and find out what happens in episode 2.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of hooked. And so thank you for introducing me to yet another show that has already been canceled. Because I'm never, unless I write it myself, I'm never going to find out what happened with Mike.
Brace yourself, because we've got a lot more of these going as we progress with our Lost Media episodes. Well, I don't know what else to say about it. I mean, it's hard to talk about media that it doesn't exist anymore, and I'm kind of grateful that there are these companies that take on these projects in order to try to at least give us a glimpse at what could have been or what might have been. And so I really like doing these Lost Media things, because it's kind of fun to sit and talk about and wonder, what if, as you said. And this one I think falls in that same area. It's kind of fun to just sit and talk about these things.
Well, and as interesting as it would have been to see what would have happened with Mike and Susan and the American Revolution, it also, I'm a little glad it didn't happen, because, as continuity fans wanting to try to fit everything together, we already have issues trying to get the TV comics to match with the TV show, and then the movies that don't really work at all within the TV show realm. This would have been another one of those instances where you kind of have, well, that's that, and you have to keep it separate because it's its own thing. So I'm glad that it wound up not really going into fruition, and I think it probably potentially could have not let us have Big Finish in the future.
Yeah, that's very true. It's one thing to look at it as kind of a mild curiosity in a junkyard as to, what it is. But if you really extrapolate, well, okay, what could have been? Well, let's say that it took off and it was successful and it ran for the 52 weekly installments and became as popular as the show. And then BBC realized, well, we can run this on radio and it's a heck of a lot cheaper than producing a television series every week. So let's just do this. And so then maybe you get 700 episodes of Journey into Time and there is no more Doctor Who on TV. I mean, that's outlandish, but it's not outside the realm of possibility.
Yeah, it's pretty slim, though, because I don't think radio programs ran as long as television programs, and I'm not sure this would have had the longevity that the television series had, because it is better as a visual medium. I mean, Big Finish has proven that they can do it in audio, but I think because technology is advanced, because sound design is so much better. I mean, you'd have been listening to this on what equates to an AM radio today, and it would not have been as good. Now, I agree that there would be a few of those continuity fans that would try to shoehorn this in and figure out how it fits. But I think just like the movies don't, and you just let them be their own thing. I think he would have just let this be its own thing as well, especially had it gone off in a different direction than the TV series, because there would have been no way to, justify the reason why in one instance they go to the far past and in another they go to the American Revolution. It wouldn't have worked. So I think he would have just naturally said, okay, well, this is a different thing.
And just, for fans that have been in it and know about it, that's fine. But, introducing someone new to it and they go, well, what's that? And you don't want to be, that's just yet another thing of, well, that's not truly canon. So don't worry about that right now. It's just one of those,
It's Doctor Who.
It makes it messier.
I suppose I suppose that's true looking to it from our future perspective. But I mean, when this had aired, potentially it would have been just in other markets. And Doctor Who did not make it to the U.S. until the late 1970s, early 1980s, as far as a television show. So I think America would have been introduced to Doctor Who much earlier. And it would have been
the TV show might not have come over.
Yeah,
as well.
or when it came over here, we'd have looked at it and gone, "Well, that's not Doctor Who."
Yeah. See.
Oh God, can you imagine the discussion forums on that? If that instead of this being the oddity, if the TV show, because it had come after, was I don't like that they changed it. Who's this Ian and Barbara? Where's Mike? I mean, can you imagine those discussions?
Those discussion forums in 1980?
Well, you know what I mean. That if
in the U.S.
extrapolating to now,
yeah, the fans
extrapolating to now that there's a whole Doctor Who fandom, and they're going, "Well, this is not what we know."
Yes, if technology had come along sooner.
If you're going to put "what could have been" in your episode title, I'm gonna speculate.
There you go.
What could have been?
Back to that article, one of the things I found fascinating, and I think I sort of read between the lines, is did anybody get the impression that, and I can't remember the name of the company that was producing the actual radio series, but did anybody get, because it went by two different names, but does anybody get the idea that they were really, the reason why this didn't happen and fell apart is because they were trying to get it commercialized and played in the UK, and that
that's the impression they
got.
It
felt like the overseas stuff was almost a bit of a ruse in order to convince the BBC to allow it to be played on commercial radio in the UK. I just thought that it really felt like this would have happened had they gotten that component, but when they realized they weren't going to get that component and they weren't going to get those marketing dollars in the UK, that they just kind of let it flounder and fail.
I got that impression too, and I think part of
good. It wasn't just
why it's there is it also, the article points out that at the end, had this come along 5 years later, it probably would have been successful and would
right.
have happened because of the commercial landscape for radio changed drastically once the 70s hit.
Fascinating stuff. Well, Sean, do we have more fascinating stuff coming up on the schedule?
Always and forever. Next up, well, I think so. Next up, we return to the Big Finish monthly range with a look at the crimes of Thomas Brewster and the return of Evelyn to our ears, which I'm excited for, along with taking a look at the recently released animation for the Underwater Menace. We've also got a companion archive on Kariz, as we will be looking into the Sontarans versus the Routons. What is this? Round Trip Part 2, Round Trip Part... I'm confused.
Those are short trips.
Short trips. I need to look over at the next column. God, I'm tired. Okay, so the Sontarans versus Routons is the special release from the classic series. That one just came out recently, right? I'm thinking.
Yep, just released this month.
So we'll be doing the first story of that, and then there's 2 short trips, Day in the Life, that are part of this as well, After Midnight, Before Midnight, which feature Kariz, which is how we're putting together a companion archive. And then another discussion panel where everybody's done it, so we thought we'd throw our hands in the fire, or irons, or something. We're going to burn something down, where we're going to dreamcast Doctor and Companion and kind of put our own spin on that tired old horse that we have flogged. Not here. And then we'll come back to Sontarans and Routons for part 2. And then finally, long awaited, returning to the world of Lethbridge Stewart with the Laughing Gnome. We're ready for Lucy Wilson and the Bleedo Cadets, and we're finally, I feel like we owe Tim Gramble an apology, finally getting around to the Candy Jar books for that.
And, of course, you can find more information about this on our website, travelingvortex.com. If you get any value out of this podcast, why not consider putting some value back into it? You can do that by joining our Patreon. If you do that, we give you access to some behind-the-scenes and other audios and specials from us. And please consider giving us a 5-star review wherever you subscribe to this podcast. And make sure you're joining in the conversation, our listeners forum on Facebook. Hopefully you're following us on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on X, formerly known as Twitter. I think I said Twitter before. TikTok is where I was going next. TikTok. We're also on TikTok. Anything else we need to talk about before we close this show? If not, until next time, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.
Direction point! Direction point!
A Doctor Who podcast network.